Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, and I'm your host, Thom Jennings. And as always, I want to thank everybody out there for listening. And has been the tradition, I don't really have a ton of episodes. I think I'm up to 12 or 13. I've typically gone an episode with just me, then with a guest, and then I've tried to alternate, but we've got guest, and guest. So if it sounds like I've said all this before, it's because we've had nothing but technical difficulties. I've already introduced Amanda into my room about 8 times, and that didn't come out right, did it, Amanda? But anyhow, Amanda Kozody, and we have, what time is it? We're recording this we started at around 8 o'clock. It's about 8:37, and we finally got things underway after all the technical difficulties. But that aside, first of all, I want to thank you for being patient while we got everything set up, and welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast.
Of course. I'm excited to be here. We persevere, so it's all good.
We persevere. So just a little background on how you and I met. I bartended at a place in Medina, N.Y, and it's a meadery, and I always try to emphasize the D because, we don't serve salami. It's mead. It's honey fermented beverage. And I knew your husband before I knew you, but you came in, and I think one of the great things about being a bartender is you get to meet a lot of different people. And your husband's a bartender, so maybe we can talk a little bit about that later. But my friend Jack Burris, he calls me up the other day and he says, Tom, you do these interviews and all that other stuff, and do you ever prepare for this stuff? And I said, usually if I do an interview, I try to prepare a little bit, but you, young lady, are a tad of a mystery online. I think I found some YouTube videos with cats. It may have been something that you did a while back, but you don't have
a big thing, actually, but we'll cover that.
We'll cover that. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody, and we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. I'm Amanda, first of all.
Did I not say that at this point?
You
okay.
did. I'm just introducing myself.
All right.
You did. I don't, have a fancy title per se. A little background, a lot of people you've talked to are from the area or grew up here or have spent a substantial amount of time around. I only arrived here about 7 years ago because of my husband, Chris, or Koz, as everyone typically calls him. After we got married, we decided to move up here. So I actually grew up in Florida and moved around a couple times, college and other places. Friends took me to different states, and I actually met Chris in Virginia. So we started dating and moved back to Florida for a few years, and then about a year after we got married, we decided to move up here. So I'm kind of the tag along typically with him because he knows everyone and all the places and all of the things. But I've become the person that people are always like, where's your wife? Where's your wife? She's great. We love her. Bring her back. So, I don't have a huge online presence. It's funny you mentioned the cats because that's about the only thing that I have put out that means anything on the internet. They ironically went viral, not on purpose. So I'm a crazy cat lady with cat internet videos.
Wow. See, I guess that's a thing. I mean, I'm a high school teacher, so I know that cat videos are a bit of a thing. Mm-hmm. But
who knows? But
I mean, you're here today because I try to pick people that I just have good conversations with, enjoyable conversations. Some conversations are good, but not enjoyable. Enjoyable conversations with outside of the podcast realm or whatever. And you've come in a few times, and I admired you. You've got a lot of spunk. I think you got a great personality. You got a big personality, and I noticed. I guess we'll use this as a starting point. If it's not too personal, if I get too personal, just say Tom's too personal. But anyhow, like my wife and I, we're very different people. I feel even though that your husband is a bartender, those that don't know him, he's a little more reserved. I mean, he's not shy or anything like that, but he's certainly more reserved. I think in the relationship, you seem to have kind of the bigger personality. I mean, is that accurate? And how, I mean, how did you get together with, I mean, you seem like you're very different people.
Yeah. Um, I would say my personality, I definitely bigger. I'm an only child, so I was brought up around adults. I had the mature aspect going on at the age of 10 and adult conversations and I had to speak up if I wanted to be heard in a room full of adults because my family is very large. So I had to be loud and obnoxious sometimes, which that works out. But I actually work in sales. So usually when I'm out and about, that side of my personality kicks in. I'm actually very introverted otherwise. But in the right scenarios, we're definitely a little different when it comes to how outgoing I am versus him. We met at Bass Pro Shops. We worked together in the archery department and became friends first and then started dating. And it was just one of those things that we got along so well and our differences equaled a lot of our interests. So it worked out.
And, I mean, you mentioned that you're not from the area, that you moved up here and you're an only child. And I wonder, I know, like with me, I kind of grew up in the Western New York area. I've kind of bounced around a little bit and everything, but a couple of times I moved away, but it was difficult to be far away from family. So, I mean, at some point you had to make a choice to move to this area. I mean, was that difficult and have you fully acclimated?
Yeah, it was difficult in the sense that I'm very close with my parents, especially as I've gotten older. We have a great relationship. But I've always been very independent and they know that and they all have always supported it. But we talk all the time. They come to visit several times a year. We usually trade back and forth. So, being around family is super important. But I've also gotten really close with Christopher's family. So that, has family's huge anyway. So it's family. It works. But I would say, as my dad would say, it is what it is. We're very laid back, go with the flow kind of people. So when we see an opportunity, even though it's out of our comfort zone, we just kind of go with the flow, see what happens. And that translates into my life, my job, all of the above.
And I know we talked about this at the bar at one point, and I'll tell you the reason I'm kind of want to pick your brain, so to speak, about this particular topic of being an only child. Now, I'm not an only child, but I have a granddaughter, and I just adore this young girl, and she's an only child. And I mean, I know that my son and his wife, my daughter-in-law, have kind of talked about that, and they wonder, like, what is the impact on a kid that's an only child? I mean, I think there's maybe some stereotypes out there that an only child can be spoiled, they can be this, they can be that, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to change that little bugger for anything. So maybe you could talk about the advantages and disadvantages of being an only child.
Yeah, I, growing up, wanted a sibling, I think. All of my friends, close friends growing up had siblings. And my dynamic was just different. I had cousins or neighbors, but that's not the same thing. Like it's a very different relationship. And then as I got older, I also realized that because I was an only child, my family got to do a lot more, trips and being involved in sports. I grew up in the church, so if I wanted to go on church trips, it was easier for my parents to pay for me to go versus my friends who had 3 or 4 siblings who they had to pick and choose which ones they could go on. So that was kind of a big deal. And then as I've gotten older, I think seeing, for example, my husband with his sisters, it's interesting to see the family dynamic. That's not something that I ever understood because I didn't have it. So the relationship between siblings was a curious thing to me, and especially seeing how they interact as adults. But it's also now that I'm getting older, my parents are getting older, the reality sets in that ultimately when my parents are older, that I will be the one and only to take care of them. So that's, something that health issues arise through the years with my parents, it starts to kind of way down. I'm over 30 now, and they're getting older. So that's where it gets a little difficult. But I think that because I was an only child and the way that we grew up with both my parents working, we weren't rich by any means. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich. But then we were able to enjoy things that I think other families couldn't do because they had multiple children. So I grew up in Florida. I got to go to Disney on a regular basis. So that was a lot of family building that maybe I would have had to come up with in a different way with siblings.
Wow, that's incredible stuff. And in many ways, it's as far as like me thinking about my granddaughter, because I'm not going to be around when she's 30. I mean, I'll be gone by then, sadly, unless some medical technology exists or whatever. Right. But I see a lot of that too in terms of how they're able to really spend a lot of quality time with her. And I know I was the youngest child, so kind of like by the time the parents got to me, they were like, yeah, they sort of threw it in. They didn't put all the energy that they did into some of the older siblings. I mean, that's just a reality. But the thing that you said that really kind of hit home for me, and I'm really impressed that you have begun to think about this, is like the idea that, your parents are going to get to a point where maybe they need somebody to take care of them. And I mean, I lived by my mother, so I was here. My two sisters didn't, and so they didn't have to worry about that. But I mean, does that weigh on you, or is it just something you're kind of resolved as what you have to do because you're an only child?
There's times where it can definitely weigh on you, or I think it would anyone. But I think that as much as my parents gave me growing up, I'd be happy to do any kind of sacrifice to make sure that they're taken care of in the future. Thankfully they're still on the younger side. They're both still in their 50s. So we've got hopefully many, many more years, but it is one of those things that, I don't know, it's the nature of life, full circle. So I think that it's one of those things that I know, since they live out of state, that'll be something that I'll have to consider probably sooner than I'd want to, just because we do live farther away. If we lived closer, I probably wouldn't worry about it as much.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, I mean, they're in their 50s. I mean, I'm 55, so I get it. I mean, I'm not young, but certainly I'm not looking to check into a nursing home anytime soon. But I'm impressed at the fact that that's something that you think about. And I think that is an important thing for all siblings to think about, especially, if you have 3 or 4 siblings, or 4 or 1 or however many. At the end of the day, somebody's probably going to have to deal with a parent or two that's not able to take care of themselves.
Yeah, and from what I've seen, it honestly typically falls on one specifically.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've seen it where it's a group effort, but there's definitely always that one child that stands out in the group that ends up being the caregiver. At the end times. My mom does that for my grandmother at this point. When my grandfather passed away, my grandmother moved in with them. And, my grandmother has had some health issues, especially over the last 3 months. So my mom that's that role, she has 2 brothers. They live out of state. So the natural thing is that it's my mom. So,
yeah.
But my dad's a saint and helps out too. So that's why I'm thankful to also be married, to have a partner, because I know Christopher would do the same thing. So,
and we'll get to the married thing as well. And, another experience like on my level. So for instance, with my wife, now I was married twice. My first wife was an unmitigated disaster. And if you've listened to the archives, you know that, but, one of the things I didn't have was a brother. I had 2 sisters. So when I got married, my wife had a brother. And then actually my sister wound up marrying a guy too. So, I inherited these brothers-in-law. And it really kind of filled a void that I didn't have growing up as a kid. Now I got somebody I can kind of call my brother. Do you feel the same way with, you don't have, I suppose if they're listening or if they're not or whatever, but I think we've talked about it outside of this, that they have maybe become more like sisters or definitely more like family. Has that filled any kind of void for you as well?
Oh, yeah. Alex and Adrian both, even though Adrian lives far away, they've been a part of our relationship since the very beginning. Even when we lived out of state, they were a part of our wedding. And especially now, more so, honestly, since they've both had children. I have a niece and a nephew. That has brought a huge joy into my life. that otherwise I wouldn't have experienced. I don't have siblings. I wouldn't have got a niece or nephew. So that's been a huge highlight.
And I mean, as far as I know, this is a deeply personal question, but again, a lot of this has to do with just my own personal experience, and I'm always interested in hearing different perspectives. So my youngest son, who I never have to worry about listening to this podcast, maybe he will when I'm dead, or I don't know. But he's been with somebody, they're doing great, but they don't want to have kids. I mean, that's like as an old guy, it's like I want grandkids, I want grandbabies. You don't have kids. Is that is that planned, or do you?
It's not necessarily planned. We did actually try to have kids for a little while, and it doesn't come as easy to some people as others, and that's just the nature of the beast. I think that eventually, when our life slows down a little bit, I'm very involved with my job and have been for the last few years, so we haven't taken it any further than just the normal aspect. But doctor-wise, that might be something that we explore. I think we're both right now at a point where we're just finishing up with house renovations. So that's once I think that gets settled, we'll kind of circle back to that. I think we both want a kid, probably just one. But yeah, it's something that hasn't been in the cards for us until, something changes.
And I feel like it's strange. Like being a dad, it may sound weird to say this, but I mean, kids are expensive. I think they've gotten a lot more expensive in this day and age. And at some level, I think society says, oh, you got to have kids, but you don't necessarily have to have kids. And I feel like a lot of people don't feel that pressure like they used to back in the day. But I almost wonder, you said something earlier that kind of made me think of it too, is that you said, well, my parents only having one kid, they were able to do a lot more. So on some level, you have to be very aware of the financial responsibility and the time commitment.
Yeah, for sure. And that was something that I feel like my parents tried to not make a big deal out of, the money side of it. But being an only child, you overhear a lot of conversations as a young adult, young teenager that you probably shouldn't have. But I knew there were struggles. I understood that. And, it made me appreciate what they did for me even more. So.
And I assume they're not the parents that put the pressure on you like I put on my kids. Like, I need a grandbaby.
No, thankfully not. Thankfully not. They both definitely want a grandchild for sure, but they're the understanding that our lives, we've made different choices throughout the years, and we both take pride in our work, and we work a lot, and I work way too much, probably, especially at this point, but that'll slow down eventually. I think I'm 32, maybe 33. Can't remember. But I got a couple more years. I can make a decision if necessary. But yeah, we've enjoyed being married for the last 7 years. We've been able to travel and do a lot of things that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do without or with kids, So I'll say that we've enjoyed that for sure. Late nights and sleeping in late is really a great quality to have on the weekends without having to worry about waking up with a kid. But yeah, I look forward to that eventually someday.
And you touched on work, and I think that was another thing that I've kind of picked up and had a sense in terms of our discussions in the past that you're very driven. Mm-hmm. And you said you're in sales, so I think I have a sales background as well. But what is it about sales that drives you?
Well, it's funny because while it is sales, that's not the main thing that drives me. It's the management part of it. I've been doing that for the last few years, 3 years, 4 years. And I really enjoy motivating others and the training aspect, the teaching, and helping others develop their skills. I was never like the top sales rep when I was just a regular rep, but I was always looking to what we call team sale. If somebody had a really good sale and needed some help, I would jump right in and help them get that closed. I did well for myself, but upper management noticed that my passion was more with helping and developing. So that just kind of pushed me into the management role. And it just so happens that I'm in the sales world, and it has more to do, honestly, with how well I'm paid and the benefits of that. Because I could go anywhere and manage, I suppose. But the company I work for has made it very known that they treat us well, and I'm very thankful, because I wouldn't be, where I am this far into my career. I've been with them for going on 7 years, 8 years almost, but I've been able to work my way up over a very short period of time, just really within the last 4 years. So.
Yeah, and I get the sense that, I mean, the company you work for, if you don't mind, is it all right if I say it?
Oh, yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, it's T-Mobile, and because there's one night you came in and you were just talking about T-Mobile, and I was just, I as I mentioned, I was in sales, and I was very similar in the approach. Like, I'm not really a closer per se. I'm sort of more like hey, let's, like you said, some personalities jive better with others. So then rather than just send one guy in and hope, or gal, and hope that they can get it done, let's figure out a way to all support each other so that we can all win. Because sales can be very cutthroat and whatever.
Definitely.
But it's nice to hear that I could tell you always wear T-Mobile swag when I see you out at the bar, maybe because it's coming from work. But even when you spoke to me about their services and products, you did it with a sense of honesty and with some pride. And I don't know that that's necessarily easy to do.
It's definitely not. Before I worked for T-Mobile, I worked for a different cellular company, and it was very cutthroat. Like, you had to bend the rules a little more so than I was comfortable with to be quote unquote successful, what they wanted you to be successful at. And I wasn't comfortable with that. My morals just didn't line up with what they were asking. So I was looking for other job opportunities. And another friend of mine that I worked with previously was like, hey, T-Mobile's hiring. You should check them out. Like, it's a completely different world. I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. It's still sales. And at the time I was thinking maybe I should just get out of sales. Maybe this isn't for me. But then when I started working for them, it was very different. It's still, you make commission, so you got to make a sale, right? But they allowed us to be more transparent and honest, because they, at the time, were really building the push that the customer was the focus. Like, we wouldn't be anywhere without the customer. So if the customer is not happy, then we're not successful. So that was the foundation that I came in on, and they've done a good job of upholding that with us. But yeah, that's something that's important to me. The sale is important, making money is important, but ultimately I want to do it the right way, not being sleazy salesman like a lot of other sales jobs are.
So, I mean, what was the experience at the previous company that even made you look for a job at T-Mobile?
They would want you to push a specific product, even if someone didn't need it. It was this is the hot topic. This is what everybody has to have right now, because it's something new we came out with, and we think everyone should have it. And it just wasn't for everyone. They were trying to sell high-end, phones to older people who didn't know how to use them, and it was still very new at the time, or selling features on an account, and they would be like, hey, just tell the customer that it's included in their plan, but really it's an extra $25, and I couldn't do that knowing that it was a cheaper option. It was cutthroat, and that there were people who didn't care if the customer was mad that what we would call slamming their account, giving them all these features that they didn't really need. There were people who would do that. You'd end up with cloud services and like these $299 charges that would add up over a year, but customers don't look at their bill sometimes, so they wouldn't catch it. And I hated that mentality. And then we were measured obviously based on what we sold, and if you didn't hit a specific goal, your job was threatened. And that's sales, I guess, at the basis, but I feel like that's archaic at this point.
Yeah, I mean, commission sales, it's a tough gig, but I think if you get to a point where you have enough in the pipeline and you've built your reputation up and all that, those numbers just kind of, they fall into place. I mean, I would imagine during COVID, maybe there was some challenges, but I don't know that your industry would have been that impacted. But I mean, I mean, if you're managing people, I suppose you have to kind of impress upon them that, I mean, you have to get it like, well, if I don't sell, I don't make a commission, but I can't really sell something that I don't believe in. So it really, every sale is like a moral struggle on so many levels.
It definitely is. And that's why a lot of people kind of underestimate the money that can be made in sales, because not everybody sees that, not everybody has the same drive. Not everybody could do that. And like I said, I don't think I, at the root of it, am a salesperson or a salesman. But I've definitely learned over the years the right way to do it and the right way to talk to people and incentivize them to see the benefit in what they're paying for. But also, it's something that they need to have. Cell phones aren't going away anytime soon. So it kind of makes it easier. But yeah, ultimately the way that T-Mobile structures everything as far as employees, like they pay us really well. We have health insurance, 401ks. We have a lot of benefits that other sales industries don't offer. So I've stuck around for that, and just the people that I end up working with. I've made great friends with people that I've worked with, because they tend to hire similar personalities, so it works out. But yeah, it's a unorthodox way of making money to some people, but over the years it's honestly taught me more than I imagined it would have. I didn't see myself being a career salesperson, but here we are 7 years later.
What was your original, like I suppose when we're younger, we all think, this is what I want to be. I mean, I wanted to be a radio host, hence the Bagel Logic podcast,
Right. Yeah. I think when I was a kid, teacher was kind of on the mind. And then as I got older, I was a camp counselor for a few years, and I realized that other people's kids stress me out. So the teaching probably wasn't exactly what I wanted, or at least that age group that I dealt with. And then honestly, I said before, I grew up in the church. I went the youth pastor route for a little bit and did some mission trips and things like that. And that was where I started to learn the leadership aspect. And that was what I enjoyed, was helping other people do what they wanted to do. So, and then the sales just kind of happened because it was a job at the time. And then it took off. So it kind of built itself organically, I guess. Which
church were you? I know we've talked a little bit about your church background, but I've never really done a deep dive into it. So what denomination?
I grew up in the South, so Southern Baptist predominantly. And then I went to high school at a Pentecostal church, actually, and kind of branched into that through 2008, 2010, after college or after high school. And then, but definitely raised more Southern Baptist than anything.
I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but you don't strike me as a Southern Baptist.
I know. I know. Believe me. That's definitely one of those things where I look back and I learned a lot, obviously, but definitely it was a part of my culture where I grew up. Everybody in my family was Southern Baptist, the majority of them. And I grew up in a small town, and that's all there was, except for one Methodist church. And, they didn't really get along. So you either stay in the Southern Baptist or you don't go, basically.
Yeah, those Methodists and Southern Baptists, but there's so many different branches of Methodism. There's even Methodists that don't get along with Methodists, and Southern Baptists that don't get along with Baptists, and and then you said you went to a Pentecostal church as well.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother layer of
opposite side
of church there. Other than even from Southern Baptist.
Yep. Yeah, that was it was a culture shock. Honestly, there was just a lot more emotion involved than I ever realized when I went to a Pentecostal church. I was like, wow, the music is incredible, but so emotional. And it was just, there was just a lot of characteristics that I missed out on that I didn't know was even a thing. I know you mentioned in one of your previous episodes when you first went to a Pentecostal church and heard someone speak in tongues. And it was a very similar experience for me as well. I was like, wow, okay, interesting. So that was something that I was never taught in the Southern Baptist. It was definitely more like you were talking about with being a Catholic. You have your stand up, you sing, you sit, you listen, laid back.
Yeah, it's quite an experience, you know. I mean, and I'm not picking on Pentecostals. I think anybody that has faith and I mean that's a good thing. I don't, you know,
Yeah.
I don't have to agree with it, but man, it's just so weird, and it's not. I think sometimes it's hard to wrap your brain around it because as odd as it is to us,
Mhm.
that's that's got to be pretty normal to a bunch of people.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, just the fact that there's, so many different branches, denominations in one um, religious group, and they all believe sometimes very different things across the board. It's interesting. I've traveled the world and met different people from different countries, and it's interesting to see their version of, our Pentecostal or Methodist or Baptist. It's even different there. So
And I admire you. I mean, saying that being a youth pastor, that it gave you some leadership qualities, and I mean that sounds like, if nothing else, I mean you had a good experience with the church. I mean, where are you at right now in terms of, do you attend church? Do you?
I don't actually. I realized that there were just a lot of politics in going to specific churches over the years, that I just something that I fell out of just because of that. I went to a Baptist college for 2 years, and with the intent of coming out of it on the other side as a youth pastor slash missionary, something of that nature. And through that time, I went through a couple of different churches in the area I went to. And if you didn't align with certain things that they liked, you kind of got either looked over or pushed to the side, or maybe even more negative. But yeah, I mean, my faith shifted over the years. I learned a lot about what I believed in, what I didn't believe in. And I think that, if anybody goes to a specific church, I support that. I love that. It's just not something that I do now in my life at that point. I've definitely carried faith throughout the years in a different way than I thought I would when I was 20 versus now when I'm over 30. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that episode that you mentioned, I mean, it's the struggle that I've had is that there was a part of me that always wanted to find that church. You know, it's kind of like finding that band or finding that restaurant, or not to make it, but it's tough when you feel like, especially if you've been in it, and then at some point you think, oh, this is what I'm going to do for a career. Because as I mentioned in that episode, I was going to be a Lutheran minister. People look at me now, they go, "You got to be kidding me! You're just too nutty." I mean, I can't believe that you were ever able to preach in a church. But there's a part of me that really misses that. But you're right; it's the politics that can really beat you up. And I'm sure that not every church is or whatever temple or mosque or anything is like that. And I'm not saying that because I'm worried about offending anybody. I mean, it's just the reality of it. I'm sure maybe there is a church out there for you or for me, but I certainly haven't found it yet either. So it sounds like at least we have some common ground there.
yeah, and I think you have to have priorities. I always loved the community aspect of church and what it brought, and the support that you would get from the people you got close to. But yeah, ultimately it was, some churches you'd go to and you could see maybe my ideologies didn't line up with theirs, and so it wasn't worth the time. But yeah, I do envy those people who can find a church or a group like that. It's I was forced to go to church a lot of the times when I was younger. That was like, I didn't want to get up early on a Sunday, but I definitely look back now and think, that was a nice community to be a part of in a different way. If it would have, over time worked out that way. But, that's a part of life. You live and you learn.
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's kind of like I almost feel about church the same way I feel about political parties. I wish there was one that fit me better. It's like, here we go. We have two choices. You're either A or you're B, and it's like, well, maybe I like a little more about A than I do B, but man, A's doesn't totally make me sing either. And And then I think, well, you know what? I kind of got to be involved in politics because I'm a citizen, right? You know, and I used to have this. I used to have this idea. People used to say, "Oh, you know, if you don't vote, you're a horrible person." And I used to have this quip. I'd come back and go, "Yeah, well, you know what? I prefer you don't vote because it makes my vote that much more powerful." But now it's like I don't even, you know. As I said, I said same thing. It's at church, politics, everything. It's weird that we all are so different, and yet we're forced to conform into this little box. It can be frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's part of the hard thing, especially seeing the vast difference, like we mentioned before, from Baptist to Pentecostal. The judgment that there is from one to the other sometimes is what bothers me. Because, like, what if I wanted to believe some of that and some of this, and that's what I feel should be right, and it's not hurting anyone. You know, it's kind of the thing. Like, it's my belief, but you get judged pretty hard for that sometimes, and it's the same thing with politics. Both are very important in life, and that's what makes the world go around. But yeah, trying to fit it all into one box, I don't do well with getting pushed into one corner. You know, I have a lot of different opinions, you know.
And do you think that the fact that you have all these different opinions and maybe you strike me as the kind of person whose opinion can change in an instant if you're presented certain information, and maybe over time that, you know, it's all, I mean, is that really what gives you the strength to be a good leader in sales and everything? Because when you're dealing with the public, that's exactly what you're dealing with. You're dealing with all kinds of dynamics as far as individuals and tastes and all the things that come along with it.
Yeah, I think that you have to be flexible. One of the things I always say is the only thing constant in my life is change, for better or worse sometimes. But it does present you with choices that you have to make. Do you want to listen to some other opinions and decide if that's something that you want to believe, or not even necessarily believe, but just be okay with? Or is it something that you find a firm line where you draw it in the sand and say, nope, that's as far as I go there. But I think you have to be flexible, like you're saying, when you deal with the public. But it takes a lot for me to change an opinion. But I'm also one of those people that I love to research things. I'm not afraid to change my opinion. That's the big thing. It's going to take a lot. I want to see, you know, the benefits, the positives, the negatives. But yeah, I think that if you go through life always just believing one singular thing without even exploring other options, I think you're missing out on a lot, even if it's not going to necessarily change your entire point of view.
All right. So I'm running out of battery power on my phone, so we're going to have to wrap up at some point because we had so many technical difficulties earlier. I wasn't able to charge my phone to 100%. We at least got about 5 or 7 minutes. So we got to come up with some good stuff here. So tell me about the cats. Like, what was the deal with the cat video? I got to hear this.
I knew it was going to come around. So, oddly enough, we saw viral cat videos of people putting objects behind their cats when they're not looking. And the cats would turn around and freak out because they didn't quite understand where that object came from. And at the time, cucumbers were the things that people were using. And I don't know if it's because it looks like a snake or what, but so we decided to try it. We had 2 cats and we're like, they're kind of crazy. Let's see how they react. And it was pretty funny. I thought it was funny. And at the time, Facebook didn't have a video uploading tool. So you had to upload it to a separate platform to then share it on your Facebook. So I just put it on YouTube. It was there for a few months. And then all of a sudden, this company reaches out and is like, hey, we want to license your video. And I thought it was a scam. I 100% thought it was a scam. And they wrote an email and they're like, hey, we reached out to you before. We'd really like to license your video. These are the stipulations. If you're interested, you get to pick one of the 2 things. We'll pay you a lump sum of money to just own the rights, or you can choose 50% of the profits that it could potentially make in the future. So Chris and I sat down and we're like, okay, if this is legitimate, we're not making money on it right now anyway, so let's just choose the 50%. What's the worst that could happen? We make $2. That's fine. You know, not a big deal. So we did that, and within a year, we made like $2,000 from it being used on various commercials across the world. it was shared in a video or a movie called 9 Lives with Kevin Spacey, before all of his craziness. But yeah, they're in the opening credits of a movie, with various other cat videos. But we never saw that ever happening. That wasn't the intention. It just happened. And so now my cat's video of them being scared by a cucumber has been seen by thousands of people, potentially millions, because it's been shared in places that I don't even know. It was in a Volvo commercial in Japan. So,
wow.
Yeah, crazy.
Did you get your cats an agent after that or anything like that?
Well, we should have, because they probably still could have been making some money. Who knew? But yeah, we the first check we got, we bought them some really fancy cat food and a new cat tower for them to climb up on, because we're like, we can't just use it for ourselves. That's selfish. So they're spoiled. But yeah, it was very strange. Never anticipated having a viral video. So.
All right. Well, I've got this song queued up, and you know what it is. I believe you were named after this, and I'm just hoping that I don't get sued by Epic Records. Don't ask me why I know what record label they're on. Probably because I grew up listening to this song. Here we go. All right. If out there, if you're not like... Now, when I uploaded this, I'm like, I probably shouldn't get to the part where he says, "And I love you," because that would be a little bit on the creepy side. But
with the belting at the end.
Yes. When's the first time you heard that song? I actually saw Boston when they performed that album from beginning to end on the original tour.
Incredible.
And anytime I meet anyone named Amanda, that song literally just plays in my head over and over again, like I think they call it an earworm. So,
Yep.
So when's the first time you heard it? And did you think it was actually written about you?
I did. I mean, for the longest time, my dad honestly used to play the song for me all the time. They were going to name me Samantha, and then they were riding in the car. My mom was several months pregnant, and that song came on. My dad's like, "Hey, wait a second. We should change her name. I like this. I like Amanda better." So I grew up on Boston, all of the songs, not even just that one, but yeah. So it was a staple in my life.
And a fantastic album, and a great and a great way to end this this interview. Now, we didn't mention earlier, but in the archives, the #1 listened to episode is with Alex Gilman, and Alex is indeed your sister-in-law. So
Yes, she is.
so somehow, if you've managed to get a cat video viral, your challenge for this particular podcast episode is to make this viral enough that you get more listens than Alex.
That's a hefty record to beat, but we'll try it. We'll see what happens.
Well, Amanda, thanks again for the patience. And again, just a great candid conversation. Just everything I hoped it would be, and I know we're going to have a lot of great conversations up the road as well when you pop into the bar and all that other stuff. And
Sure.
tell your husband he's a lunkhead. I mean that with the most affection in the world. But people tell my wife when they're like, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you," and it's always a little bit of a joke. But I'm sure you get a little bit about that with your husband as well. So, and this is where we test to see if you actually listen to the end of the episode. Because even though I promised to not talk too much crap about him, I just had to get a little dig in at the end. You know what I mean?
You got to get a little stab in there.
Just got to get a little stab in there. But all right. Well, and again, everybody out there, thank you so much for listening to the Bagel Logic podcast. Man, for a second there, I sounded like I was drinking. The Bagel Logic podcast. And I've got some great topics coming up the road, or maybe I'll just, like my friend Jack Burris says, just fly by the seat of my pants. We'll do a little bit of everything. But from me to you, thank you so much. Please share, please like, and turn this particular episode into as a viral as a cat video, right?
Let's do it.
All right, excellent. All right, thanks so much.